as we go through our program. So please feel free to utilize the chat box. We have several people who will be monitoring that throughout our call today. So welcome. Next slide. So throughout our time today, we'll start with introductions. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alana Berry. I am the Director of Equity and Impact for an organization called Social Contract. We are here in this space supporting the Family Services Cabinet Council, which is a council through the Office of the Governor in our state of Delaware. And we have been supporting an emerging nonprofit, which you'll hear more about in our presentation, Trauma Matters Delaware, supporting all the trauma work that's been happening in our state. So we'll start by sharing lots of updates about that work and what's been happening. You'll learn a little bit more about Trauma Matters Delaware as a backbone organization. And then we're really excited to share a panel discussion with you all today with community members and leaders from different sectors sharing all the great work that's been happening in their sectors around trauma over the past year. Next slide. So if you are not familiar with the Delaware developmental framework, this was a framework that our state adopted. But as there was an executive order that named Delaware to become a trauma-informed state about 2.5 years ago, Delaware adopted this framework to kind of guide us through that process, where we start with trauma aware, which is really just bringing an awareness to the culture and the conversation of an organization, of our state, of individuals. This is when people are beginning to understand what is trauma, what are ACEs, what are these words, how does this relate to me in my life? As we start to go down this framework towards trauma, sensitive, responsive, and informed, that's when you really begin to see, sensitive is when you really begin to see actions change, right? And as you go to responsive, we begin to see policies and procedures and those kind of pieces begin to shift and think about what it means to become more trauma informed. And ultimately, becoming trauma informed is not a destination. It's an ongoing experience that we continue to learn and evolve and develop as we go on this path together as a state. And so over the past 2 years, really, as the executive order came into play, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in a bit, we began to work with our state agencies and the state Department of Health and Social Services, Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Corrections, Safety and Homeland Security, the Housing Authority, and others, to really begin to think about what does it mean to become trauma informed as a state agency? What are the actions and steps that we need to take to make sure that as an agency, we are supporting our Delawareans in the best way possible, and that we're taking into account their own needs, their individual needs. And so we've begun that process. Last year, you may have seen there was a strategic plan released, well, actually at the end of 2019, December of 2019, around how each of those state agencies are beginning that work. I'm happy to report that those agencies have actualized at least those initial steps from getting from trauma aware to sensitive or responsive, dependent upon where those agencies started from. And now we're really beginning to think about how do we continue to progress along this continuum as a state and bringing others into the fold, other sectors, nonprofits, et cetera, and those who have been doing the work for a long time, really elevating that work as a way for all of us to learn collectively. So with that, I will transition us over to our First Lady, Tracy Quillen-Carney, to share more.
Thanks, Alana. And thanks to everyone for joining us today, to our speakers and panelists, and to those supporting this event behind the scenes. Happy Trauma Awareness Month does not sound right, but there is actually some truth in this sentiment. The more we learn about trauma, the more hopeful we can be. Hopeful because there are effective prevention and early intervention strategies. hopeful because every one of us can make a difference, hopeful because trauma is not destiny. It was an important day you see there on the slide when our governor, for whom I have a certain fondness, signed Executive Order 24, which launched Delaware's observance of Trauma Awareness Month, as well as officially establishing the goal for Delaware to become a trauma-informed state. And in the 3 years since Executive Order 24, thanks to many partners, we've come a long way. The work continues to promote awareness of trauma as a public health crisis that we can treat and beat. And now we're also able to focus on strength-based and prevention strategies on building resilience. I have to confess, it took me a while to warm up to the word resilience. At first, it struck me kind of like the old directive to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that bootstraps idea too often has been misused by people in positions of privilege as a way of judging others, as if only individual action and character and not societal structures and biases make a difference. But in the context of our trauma work, I came to understand resilience as a concept that encompasses both our capacity as individuals and our collective responsibility, both of which can be actively built upon. Together in policy and practice, we need to cultivate the conditions for resilience, for children, for families, for communities. Social determinants of health, of opportunity, of everything that goes into the odds of having a good life. Social determinants are exactly what the words say, determined by society. Children grow, families function, communities dynamics develop in a context. The structures that are the architecture of that context must be responsive to what families and communities need to thrive in the 21st century. At the individual level, we need to recognize how every one of us can make a difference. Parents, caregivers, employers, educators, healthcare providers, first responders, nonprofit and faith-based organizations, family members, friends, and neighbors. Every interaction counts, and every relationship benefits from an understanding of trauma-informed approaches, starting with listening, not just to the data and to the science, but also to the lived experience of individual families and communities. One of the great leaders in the work to build trauma-informed systems and to empower individuals and communities, a leader since long before Executive Order 24, in fact, is Trauma Matters Delaware. And I'm very pleased to introduce the president of the TMD board, Dr. Leslie Brower.
I think I'm unmuted. Great. That's one of the challenges of Zoom. Remember to unmute yourself. Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Brower, as the First Lady said, president of the relatively new board for Trauma Matters Delaware. I recognize a lot of the names that I saw in the chat, and some of you are people who are quite familiar with TMD and have participated either on our steering group or at one of our events that we sponsored. So just very briefly, I'll update you on what's happened in the last few years. Really, a couple of really critical events happened in 2018 with the governor's executive order, and then, which you've just heard about, and then First Lady Tracy Quillen-Carney's First Chance initiative also included addressing adverse childhood experiences, which made a very logical partnership with TMD. Last fall, the board of directors was formed for TMD, and through a strategic planning process, the group developed what you see on the screen here, a vision and mission. And just quickly to read it, and we hope it resonates, and we hope you provide feedback, what you think about our work. In Delaware, all people can feel safe, grow beyond adversity, and thrive. So that's our vision of what this world in Delaware would look like if we achieved our goals. And then our mission is that Trauma Matters Delaware serves as a hub, not the only place, but a hub in advancing the collective effort to prevent and heal trauma. And with a very big emphasis on collective, because this is really kind of a movement, but it's certainly a place or a topic where we need everybody, as the First Lady said, to be stepping up and doing what they can do, what your position is in your work or your neighborhood or your family. So that's our vision and mission. We, in the fall, late fall, early November, submitted our application to the IRS to become a nonprofit, a 501c3. So we're awaiting word on that. Trauma Matters Delaware began in 2013 as just a very casual meeting. There were about 6 or 7 of us who were working on projects funded by a federal grant. A couple of those people I think are on the call today. And, we recognize we're all working from the same base of science, from what we learned from the ACE study and what we learned from scientists working on toxic stress and epigenetics and what have you. Let's come together. Let's share resources. Let's work on this. So we're all moving forward together, more as a movement. And within a couple of years, we had about 1,000. We still have more than 1,000 people on our listserv and participating in our events. Over the next 6 years before the executive order, we really did a lot of awareness building. We sponsored a lot of events and webinars and presentations. We pulled people together to figure out what are people working on already, what do they care about, how does this subject relate to the mission of their organization or their work, and really use that kind of information always to build whatever our next event was, to bring people together to build this collective work. So now we're in a position, and we'll be posting pretty soon the strategic plan for Trauma Matters Delaware that's based on that trauma blueprint that Alana mentioned, which itself was the product of a collective group of stakeholders who came together back in, I guess, in 2019 and 20. That blueprint, one of the things, the seminal things that it did is it recommended that there be a backbone organization in Delaware, and then that be Trauma Matters Delaware, that would basically be the structure, if you will, the infrastructure to support other organizations and individuals and communities moving forward to be trauma informed, to identify resources, to provide resources, and to provide leadership. And just on that subject of leadership, I just want to quote a former favorite boss of mine who was attributed, and he is, I think, pretty brilliant, but he always would say, my style of leadership is to see where the people are going and then run up and get in front of them. So I say that to give credit to all the people who have been working the fields for all these years, particularly in the area of children and family services and domestic violence, who, both were really on the forefront of understanding how things that happen to the folks they serve really can have a lifelong negative impact. It's not the only outcome. And as the First Lady talked about resilience, we know people come out of it sometimes much stronger, very often much stronger, and more compassionate with what other people have gone through. So I give credit to everybody who's been working the field all this time, and stand ready to keep the movement going. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. I now have the privilege of welcoming our panelists for today. We have 3: Julia Dumas-Wilkes from Great Oaks Charter School, Dr. Julius Mullen from Children and Families First and the Seaford Community of Hope program, and Kimberly Blanche from BB Healthcare. Thanks for being here, friends. And I'll start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and your work, and to give a quick overview of what you see as most important or most promising in your respective fields in terms of the trauma response landscape. Let's start with Julia.
Morning, everyone. First, I'm extremely honored and thank you all for having me. I just think of myself as a little old teacher, but specifically, I am a social studies and special education teacher in the state of Delaware. I'm also helping our school implement our social and emotional learning initiatives, which is extremely huge. So I know that it has become a bit of a buzzword. So I kind of wanted to break down what it is, why it's important, and how it will look in Delaware schools. As we all know, this past year has been extremely challenging for our students, their families, and teachers and staff. But social emotional learning, it is, our CASEL is a national organization that breaks down what's healthy skills look like. So it's 5 main components. There's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. This is important. Research has been done scientifically that's proven that it increases attendance, academic achievements on both grades and standardized tests. It improves attitudes and the mental health of our children and adults. It also decreases drug use. So I found this very interesting because we are actually teaching coping skills, healthy coping skills, and it makes good business sense. It helps us make sure that our young people are going into desirable workforces. So we know that as we ask computers to do more work for us, the human interactions are going to be more valuable. So we want to make sure that we're teaching our kids in school these skills. Going forward, how it will look in Delaware schools, there is actually a new regulation about multi-tiered systems of support to mandate that we have different levels of support for students and their families based on their needs. So you'll see a huge emphasis on relationships, routines, because it helps us feel safe, and those resilience building skills like mindfulness as one example. The state of Delaware, I actually am on a few different committees where we are actually planning toolkits for educators so that our Delaware educators don't feel like they have to invent everything. There's going to be lots of tools on the Department of Education website of how to teach these skills and lesson plans. We're also integrating social emotional learning into academics. So that may look like in a math class, if someone's reading a chart, a real life chart of COVID, how do we break this down? How do we know if this data is accurate? How does this make us feel, first of all? So really, it's about incorporating the humanity of our children and our community members and elevating that. I also serve with Trauma Matters Delaware on the community healing work group. So if anyone is interested, we're always looking for more volunteers. We are actually beginning talks on doing healing circles in the community because there's been many rifts and we want to focus on healing those. So if you're interested, please reach out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. Julia Smullen, better known as Dr. J. Let's go to you next. Thank you.
Thank you, First Lady. First of all, I am grateful and I'm humbled and privileged. I'm privileged to be at these tables of influence, particularly in this work of trauma and ACEs and racial inequity, social injustice, all the buzzwords that you all know all too well. Thanks to our First Lady once again and our Madam TMD President, Dr. Leslie Brower, our TMD colleagues and families, social contract, lots and lots of folks on the front lines joining together in a unified way to strengthen our trauma-informed state. So I am the Chief Clinical Officer for Children and Families First, and like many of you, wear a few different hats, but all I really do, like many of you, is encourage, educate, and empower through a trauma-informed lens. Regardless of the room I'm in, whether it's the executive room, board room, classroom, locker room, or even the living room. So trauma, mental health, and toxic stress, I think we all agree, it's real, you know. My wife was very concerned as a private practice owner, like many mental health organizations and behavioral health organizations, was very concerned how would COVID impact the sustainability of a private practice. And a year or so later, she has the longest waiting list she's ever had. Trauma, anxiety, depression, addiction, suicide have all increased, not just in Delaware, but many of our states across the land. And you know the story, whether it's COVID, racial strife, political stress, and all the associating consequences that come from those spaces. It's just too much for our brains to digest on a frequent basis. You know, I was having a conversation with a 75-year-old grandma talking about ACEs and toxic stress and the impact on the world. And she said something so provocative. She said, we're harming ourselves and we're being harmed by others as well. And we just don't know what to do. We don't know the direct impact, and our hopes and dreams are being stricken, and we're trying the best we know how. So I don't want to go into this conversation sugarcoating it, because I think that reality is so relevant and prevalent for so many of us. At the same time, like you, I'm seeing a shift in the atmosphere. That's a famous quote in my home church on Sunday morning, but I'm seeing a shift in the atmosphere. Many of us remain hopeful. We're focused on human healing. We're inspired with promise and possibility at so many different levels. We are unifying ourselves, coming together. And I wasn't convinced either, First Lady, about the concept of resilience, but boy, I embrace that word a little differently nowadays, because we are not only asking people to be resilient, but our systems are becoming much more resilient as well. So humbled again to be part of this conversation with my fellow panelists, and so for me, my heart and soul, like you, have to keep believing in hope, healing, and promise. And remember, 1 + 1 does not equal all. There's good people everywhere.
Thanks, Dr. J, as always. And now to Kim Blanche from BB Healthcare, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, First Lady. To echo what's already been said, I am deeply humbled and grateful to be a part of this panel discussion and be a part of this gathering as a whole. You know, Dr. J, you put so much out there that applies so much to the healthcare setting. I'm in population health here at BB Healthcare, and I've had the pleasure and privilege of being in this role as community services manager. I've always had a propensity to want to be of service, to be of service. This role offers me that opportunity, and I have the great support from the organization to literally meet people where they are. And we often think of that as geographically, and it expresses itself geographically often, but I'm also a big piece of that is really meeting them where they are psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And, you know, most recently our vaccination efforts through the bookmobile process has afforded us those opportunities to really listen, to really engage with individuals, and not just around that subject matter, but around many subject matters, because we're right there in their community. So there's quite a bit going on in the healthcare landscape, as I'm sure many on this meeting could attest to. But some areas that are of focus here at BB is, you know, we're really beginning to look at that relationship between trauma, those high-risk behaviors, and how that results in those poor physical and behavioral health outcomes. Once, once our providers become more knowledgeable and educated and are better able to understand the potential root cause of disease for their patients, they can help them better manage, engage with them, but also to help them better manage those behaviors, leading to, improved health outcomes and that ability to self-manage. Trauma-informed approaches to care have shown so much evidence in not just increasing the patient satisfaction piece, but also that provider satisfaction. I think sometimes healthcare workers, healthcare providers might experience some challenges, and equipping them with the knowledge that's available through trauma-informed approaches doesn't just foster a deeper level of connection, it also allows for more insightful connection to resources that might be needed by those individuals. It supports our efforts. We've been able to launch a mental health telemedicine component. So it certainly is proving to be a very viable avenue to further our work in the trauma-informed space. Trauma-informed work also helps us develop strategies to address some of what might be our most frequent utilizers, and really looking at, First Lady spoke to social determinants of health. The more that we can open our lenses to encompass all of those considerations, and then weaving in that trauma-informed approach to care, the more likely we'll meet with success in supporting that patient to their highest potential outcome. And, again, looping back to you, Dr. J, this allows us to really address those health disparities. COVID has certainly afforded us the opportunity, a glaring opportunity, to become more intimately aware and informed of our community's challenges, of the members in our communities and what they encounter. And we've been able to pivot and address those in ways that we had not before. So there was an agility that we were able to embrace that was necessitated with the rapid development of COVID, that won't be lost. We will continue to acknowledge our ability to be that agile as we move forward in our trauma-informed work. And also anticipating this second wave, which it's no longer anticipation, right? It's been here in the community. It's been here in our healthcare providers and our fellow team members in healthcare. Just the experiences they've had over the last year regarding what they might perceive as physical safety, and legitimately is physical safety if we look very, in the microcosm of PPE. But I also question how much that was psychological safety and environmental safety, and how that culture of safety, such a guiding principle in trauma-informed work, how that culture of safety was compromised or not present through their perception, regardless of the efforts that were in place. So I could continue to go on and on, but I know one of the most important pieces that Julia, you mentioned as well, is that self-awareness. So in our trauma-informed work in the healthcare setting, I think it lends a greater likelihood of that self-awareness, which is going to serve all of us much better, whether it be patients, coworkers, self, family, community. That increased level of self-awareness serves us all. So thank you again, deeply humbled and honored to be here.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you all for a good start to our conversation. As we continue the discussion, I invite all of our attendees today to put any questions into the chat, and we'll round back to as many as we can at the end of the presentations. We'll have two of our panelists address the next three questions for me, starting please with Dr. J and then Kim. Moving from your field, more specifically to you and your organization, what steps have you taken to advance trauma-informed approaches, and what are you planning to do? Dr. J?
Dr. J, you're on mute.
Man, I said some good stuff. First and foremost, Children Families First has had the leadership who believe this BS, brain science, and also made sure the leadership team, the board, the culture, also believed the BS. So it started at the top, and we formed this brain science or trauma-informed care team, starting with our previous CEO, our current CEO, and myself a few years ago. And we were among 15 organizations in the US and Canada. And we joined a Change in Mind or Brain Science Initiative with the primary goal really of infusing big P and little p, policy and practice across the agency, but also joining key stakeholders such as Trauma Matters Delaware and Trauma Informed Delaware to also impact policy. So we listen to the best and the brightest. You know many of them all too well, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris and Dr. Jack Shonkoff from the Harvard Center of the Developing Child. Tony Kane is a global icon with lived experiences and on and on and on and on. And 5 years later, we have an organization that is present, and we're very proud that we're certainly not perfect in terms of being fully trauma informed, but we have internal infusion of our brain science and trauma informed care, including board buy-in, mission reform, philosophical overturn. We have been collecting thousands of ACEs along with resiliency and more positive data as well. We have embraced best practices across all of our programs nearly. That's trauma specific and driven from those specific concepts. Our policy and procedure manual, starting from HR and training and outcomes and supervision across the entire agency has been impacted. We have a growing partnership with Wilmington University, where we creating this comprehensive brain science training institute, where we're providing trauma support for our internal staff as they experience vicarious trauma and secondary stress and racial battle fatigue and compassion fatigue. So all throughout the agency, we have infused the science. We have impacted our practices. We have a new EDI, equity and diversity and inclusion strategic framework led by our current CSO, Eliza Hurst. So all the external collaboration, TMD, TID, WIMU, and all the alphabets that you know all too well. We have partnered with national partners, trained thousands in our state, across the US, across professional disciplines. So we're really proud of our journey in the last 5 or so years. We have a new, thanks to you and the amazing leadership, First Lady Quillen Carney, we are sticking our toes, probably more than our toes now, into a completely new space in partnership with Casey Home Programs. We have a community of hope in Seaford that we have a growing number of partners driving that work, starting with Sussex County Health Coalition and First State Community Action. So without trauma-informed care driving the bus, there's no way we would have been able to pull it off. We follow the science. We've embraced the trauma-informed care concepts, which allow us to go into new spaces quite easily. And we've quadrupled, finally, we quadrupled our funding and quadrupled our staff, mainly because we follow the science and stay true to trauma-informed care. So that's just a little bit about where we've been, but also where we are and where we're going.
Thanks. Kim, you want to address this same question from your perspective?
Certainly, thank you. So here at BB, we, about a year ago, it was January of 2020, I had the pleasure of being introduced to a film producer, Nick Kelso. He was involved in a documentary called Is Your Story Making You Sick? And it's an incredible documentary, and I'm happy to share information on that with the group here. I can drop that into the chat, and I'll speak to a toolkit that you'll also be able to access as well. So he and I started these conversations and had this film screening planned for May of 2020. As we all know, COVID came to town and pushed everything back or on pause. And he and I were able to resume those conversations, which led to us having a virtual film screening as opposed to the intended in person. But we had a film screening, and that took place in November and December. We opened that up to our professional partners in the mental health and behavioral health space, and then also to our team members and community members at large. And this was an opportunity for us to kick off this multi-phase, multi-year initiative that we are working on. It's evolving, and it's been an amazing. I mean, so many people to thank for this. Alana and her support and connecting me with TMD and all the great support there. And then Dr. Deb Berkey from WilmU to throw out some alphabet soup. This is it's been a great opportunity for us to bring some awareness to our organization as we step into year one, trauma aware. And it's been the film was followed by a mindfulness training from the subject matter expert in the film, Dr. Mark Pirtle. This is all recorded, so it will be available as I share that link with everyone. And then Dr. Julius Mullen, the amazing Natasha Mullen, Dr. Tam, and Katrina Stiller, a local practitioner, all took part in a panel discussion that's also recorded. And it was just just an incredible opportunity to hear the work that's being done, to gather those perspectives, to to more deeply understand the movement and the necessity for us to move in this direction. So we have in our organizational plan is we are identifying guides, trauma-informed guides who will be trained. In addition to Dr. Berkey, we're working with the DNP student, and these guides will serve as resources, role models and resources in our organization in a train the trainer model. So we just got dates on the calendar for those trainings and really looking forward to taking these more concrete steps forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim and Dr. J. Going back to the idea of structures and collective responsibility, let's talk about the intersection of trauma-informed practices and our goal of greater equity and a more promising future for all. Dr. J, we'll start with you. Where do you see that intersection?
Yeah, I tell you, about 3 years ago, and I think this is the best way for me to emphasize the intersection. About 3 years ago, I was driving to an unnamed Midwestern state, heading to speak at an education equity conference, ironically. So I was, and I'll fast forward the story a little bit, just give you the highlights, but I was literally taunted and trailed by a police officer for about 10 miles. It felt like 50 miles, but for about 10 miles, made me get out of the car, tucked on my shirt, made me get in his car and asked me about 10 times if I had anything in the car that he should worry about. So after about 20 minutes or so, before he let me go, the look in his eyes as if to say, you know, and I know what just happened here. And when I left, I literally was in a state of shock, disassociation. I had to literally disconnect myself from that particular experience to get through it. the fear, the anxiety, the trauma. And I know my story is one of many for people who look like me and others, but racism and inequity is traumatic. That same fight and flight and freeze neurological response that we know all too well about, that occurs in people when they experience either childhood adversity or adult trauma, is the same, a very similar brain response from racial or inequity driven trauma. In my scenario, I was literally frozen in the downstairs brain with fear and anxiety and shock. And I remember my wife asking me to report the officer and call the police chief, and there's no way. That seems pretty logical, right? There's no way my brain, my neurological processing would allow me to do that. Even 3 years later, with the George Floyd murder and the Chauvin trial verdict, I sort of went to that same neurological disassociation and disconnecting from many of the play-by-play on social media or TV as a way to survive. So the intersection is powerful and provocative and profound between inequity, trauma, and racism. By the way, we have a really good talk on TMD, shameless plug here, but maybe not. TMD Talks, Eliza Hurst and I get into this conversation a little deeper. So the parallels are striking, but the resolution in the kryptonite is just as provocative. It takes safety, it takes trust, it takes empowerment and cultural humility at every level to help communities, to help individuals, to help systems move through these traumatic experiences. So I only use my personal example as a microcosm of what systemically we can do and we have to do and continue to do. It's a marathon. But the intersection is, I don't need to be convinced of that, and I hope you don't either.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that story, trusting us with that story.
Sure.
Julia, as an educator, can you address that same point?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. J, for talking about brain science, which is extremely important. One of the things that was striking to me, because education is actually my second career, I spent a decade in banking, of course, Delaware. But what's interesting when I went through my program is that we didn't get a lot of training on brain science, and we are expected to be practitioners and to teach people how to learn. And I'll give you a quote. It's from a book by Mark Brackett, and from his book, Permission to Feel. He is at Yale University and he studies children. And he said scientifically that the three most important aspects of learning are attention, focus, and memory are all controlled by our emotions and not our cognition. So what that means is, I work at Great Oaks Charter School, so 99% of our kids are Black or Brown. All of our kids are Title I school. If I have a young man in my class who is fidgeting and I just say, hey, get out of my classroom. A, he's angry. He and I do not have a good relationship. B, he missed the lesson for the day. And C, he still cannot regulate his emotions. And we're going to send him out into the world who won't take the time to say, hey, what's wrong with you? Because anger often is the only acceptable emotion, especially for males and for people of color, instead of fear or hurt or anxiety. So really explicitly teaching the skills and making it equitable, not just for those children who blow up and externalize, but we have a lot of internalizers as well. The suicide rate for, we know, our teenagers is high. The mental health of our students is extremely important. Just today, speaking with a student, hey, we noticed you haven't been checking in. And I had a student today say, my mental health is really struggling. I need some help. So how do we do that? You know, we want a healthy society, but we have to have healthy individuals, healthy families, and healthy schools. So the three things, especially with trauma sensitive approaches, are the 3 R's: relationships, routines and rituals, and then those resilience building skills. So first and foremost, we know about ACEs, but there's also PACEs now, which are the positive experiences. And we can't control as educators what goes on outside of the school, but what we know is that as a young person or even an older person has more positive experiences and positive relationships, it will buffer and give them the added strength and resilience to keep going. So I think that's what we're focusing on in the education world regarding equity is making sure that all of our kids get some sort of social and emotional lesson, but then also customizing to make sure that if, Billy had a death in the family, that he gets some sort of attention for grief. Or if Tamik is angry, he gets an anger. Or if there's other needs. So there will be small groups. You'll see we will definitely need more help from our social workers and our mental health practitioners because we're not social workers or therapists. But the idea is, like Kim said, about partnerships in the community, really having schools go towards more of a community model where we say, we have this person or this family, we need extra support, and we can refer them easily. So that's what the future looks like for education.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. I'm conscious of time and want to leave at least a couple of minutes for questions from the attendees if there are any. So I'm going to combine the next 2 questions and ask each of you just to do 1 or 2 minutes as best you can to talk about advice for organizations just starting out on becoming trauma informed, especially in light of the COVID situation and how not just its challenges, but also maybe its opportunities to elevate and promote these programs within organizations. Kim, would you start us off on that, please?
Certainly, thank you. So as in that, one of my recommendations would be to partner with, honestly, it's through Family Services Cabinet Council, Trauma Matters Delaware, Social Contract, Wilmington University, finding those key partners to support your efforts, to guide you. It's been remarkable. I can't express my gratitude enough around that partnership and what that's offered us. It's shown the light, given us the direction. I know in healthcare that one of our hills to climb is broadening the context, the connotation of trauma. And if there's a silver lining to COVID, it's that it's brought to the mainstream the psychological context of trauma, the emotional context of it. As healthcare workers, we default to physical trauma, and whether it be a motor vehicle accident or imminent surgery need due to an injury. So there's great opportunity there, and to create that culture of safety in our organization where people feel safe and comfortable in saying they need some support, they need help. And that's a big goal for us, and we look forward to getting there.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Dr. J, you gave us all some good advice when you're describing at the outset your work and some of your programs. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
Just real quick, about 30 seconds. And I've seen this on Children and Families First End, but also been teaching at Wilmington University the last 15 years, and I've seen a parallel approach. There's a few things to keep in mind in terms of this trauma-informed journey. One, you have to have leadership commitment, develop internal champions who drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak. Organizational, agency-wide, company-wide assessment. Strategic planning has to be comprehensive and vital with concrete metrics in place. The evidence-based, evidence-informed science is imperative. Training can be a trap. Because you can feel good about training, but training is only one piece. Professional development is not all inclusive. Agency-wide infusion, front desk, facility, transportation, programs, board, on and on and on. And lastly, monitor the effectiveness of the implementation and address any shortcomings to sustain momentum.
Thank you. Julia?
Well, for me, I'm big on relationships. My ask would be, I know that everyone is focused on systemic work, and that is extremely important, but we also have these interpersonal relationships. And I know it's hard when we're out, we're in the mask, we're social distancing, but just taking the time to be kind to people because we don't know what they're going through. With our students, we try to make sure that our first and our last interaction is positive, even if we have to give feedback. And also there's like it's debatable 5-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio of positive versus negative interactions, whether that's at home or at work. That really helps. Also have an attitude of just being curious, someone didn't speak to you or they didn't hold the door, just giving people the benefit of the doubt. And secondly, reaching out, getting involved in Delaware. Trauma Matters Delaware is a great organization. Thank you to those who sent in their emails. You will be hearing from us. We actually have a planning meeting this Friday, but it's monthly for the community healing work group, so that we can do more community healing work and circles. And then if you're interested in the educational approach, CASEL, KASEL, they are the national organization that spells out the competencies and regarding social emotional learning.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'll turn it over now to our friends from Social Contract to see if we can sneak in a question or two from the chat and to wind things up. Danielle and Illy are working the chat questions, and Alana, I think, will conclude things. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure we saw any explicit questions in the chat, but we'll pause for Danielle and Ileana. Lots of love. So please make sure that you read the chat when we share the video afterwards, because there's lots of love and support here. Did you see anything, Ileana, or should we move forward to closing?
I did not. I just want to note that if you want that information and you have not put your email in, be sure to do so I can collect it and pass it on to the speakers.
Thank you. Okay.
I do want to just make one quick point, which is the last link that was posted there by Sharon Merriman Nye. One of our work groups that's focused on workforce wellness has created a little program that's posted on the website, traumamattersdelaware.org, where you can go in and just very quickly enter the specifics about the trauma-related work that you're doing in your organization or your community. So please do that as part of our kind of mapping project about what's going on in Delaware. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, please, give a virtual round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all for joining, and our moderator, the First Lady, very appreciative. We are going to transition here to our closing, and I am going to turn it over to Danielle to walk you through some of the upcoming events this month.
Hi, everyone. I just want to emphasize a big thank you for attending today. We're really excited about Trauma Awareness Month and the suite of events that we have coming up. So every Wednesday of May, we have a webinar. So this series starts today, and the next webinar is called Portraits of Professional Caregivers, Their Passion, Their Pain. So Trauma Matters Delaware's primary, secondary, vicarious trauma and resilience work group will be conducting 2 showings of this movie. One is at 2 p.m. and one is at 5 p.m. And then they will host a talk back after, and that's May 12th. And that registration link should be in the chat very shortly, so you could register directly from that. The next is May 19th, is a webinar called The Blueprint for Trauma-Informed Higher Education. And that webinar will explore trauma and toxic stress and how it relates to higher education. The fourth webinar for the month is Towards a Community of Healing. That's going to be May 26th, and that will explore the African principle of Ubuntu, I am because we are, and how communities can collectively work towards healing from trauma. Finally, we have the State Agency Summit, which attendance is restricted to only state agency employees. That's going to be May 27th, and your department's state trauma lead will have all the information for that. So if you are a Delaware State employee, you can reach out to them, and they have registration information and an agenda for the day. Additionally, you can email fscc@delaware.gov for questions, and we please ask that you complete the survey that we will send out following this. That will help inform future events and make sure that our events are meeting your needs and interests. You can join the TMD listserv to stay up to date, and you could do that through the website, traumamattersdelaware.org. All the events that I named are currently on the Trauma Matters Delaware website, so you could go to https://traumamattersdelaware.org/trauma-awareness-month, and you could register directly on there. And if you have any Trauma Matters Delaware specific questions, you can feel free to email board@traumamattersdelaware.org. So once again, thank you all very, very much for participating. We hope to see you at future events, and to stay engaged.
Thank you, everyone. Expect an email from us shortly with all the information. If you registered, you'll be included on that email. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you all next week.